Hey everyone, my name is Jack. Welcome back to the channel. I'm a 23-year-old real estate investor and soon-to-be attorney, and on this channel I cover a variety of topics as they relate to real estate, investing, the markets, and pretty much everything as it has to do with personal finance. So if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. But in today's video, the day after the election, and don't worry, I will do my obligatory post-election video at some point, likely when we have really conclusive results across the board. But I want to talk about what I think is the real main factor for as to why rich people are leaving a lot of blue states, most notably California, Illinois, and New York right now. Because it's not as though these states just suddenly became democratically run and suddenly had high taxes. They've had high taxes and democratic leadership for a long time. So why is it now that rich people are leaving in droves where they could have just been doing that, say, 10 years ago? I don't think the movement has anything to do with social change or social unrest or any of that sort of thing. I don't think it has anything to do with the actual taxes themselves in these states, because again, they were high tax beforehand. But what it really has to do with is SALT. And the SALT I'm referring to here is actually the deduction, the state and local tax deduction on your federal taxes. This deduction generally allows you to deduct some portion of your state and local taxes, whether that be your state income taxes, your sales taxes in that state, or the property taxes that you might have on property that you own in that state that you pay taxes to. Now, a critical change happened to the SALT deduction with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Trump tax plan from a few years ago, back in 2017. Before that 2017 tax change, people could deduct all of their state and local taxes. There was no limit to the amount that you could actually deduct when it came to the SALT deduction. So if you were paying millions of dollars in state and local taxes, that would be a deduction on your actual federal tax bill. This would apply to median income folks as well. If you had a home that had really high property taxes, you could deduct all of that as well. But the Trump tax plan actually made a huge change to that in that it capped state and local tax deductions at $10,000 per year. So you went from having no limit to just a $10,000 limit, which really might not be a big difference for a median income earner or someone who maybe just has one property if it's their home. And it definitely won't be a big deal for those people who are in low tax states, maybe Texas, which has no income tax, or in those states which have really low property taxes, for example. Low tax states, it's not really going to make a big difference since you weren't getting a big deduction anyways. But especially in high tax states, for those people with really high incomes or really high wealth in the form of real estate, which would have a lot of property taxes, this was a crushing change. Well, maybe crushing's not the best word, but a very expensive change for sure. Let's look at an example. Let's say your name is Sam Greffin and you live in California, which has a pretty high marginal tax rate, one of the highest in the country, I believe the highest, at 13.3% for those people making more than $1 million per year. That is, any income over $1 million per year is taxed at 13.3%. It also has fairly high property taxes, though they're not outrageous. Let's say you're making a lot of money with your day job, and that day job is creating YouTube videos and also being a real estate investor, and you're doing really well, making $2 million per year. If all of that income was taxable at the state level, that means you'd be paying about $240,000 to $241,000 in state income taxes for the state of California. And because you own a couple pieces of real estate, you're paying about $50,000 per year in property taxes, which might actually be on the low side depending on how many properties you have and how expensive they are, but we'll just keep it here to keep things simple. That means you're paying just short of $291,000 in state taxes. Now, when there was no limit on the SALT deduction, you could deduct all of that from your federal taxable income. Now, I'm not going to look at any other deductions here. I'm just going to look at what the SALT deduction does for this situation. Your federal taxable income in this case would not be $2 million, but instead would be the $2 million minus about the $300,000 in taxes that you had to pay to the state, which means you'd have about $1.7 million in federal taxable income. Again, assuming no other deductions, that means you would have a $597,000 tax bill for the federal government, which means that your total taxes would be about $888,000 for that year that you made $2 million in income. Again, assuming no other deductions besides the SALT deduction. Now let's look at the situation that happened after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was enacted and had that $10,000 cap on the SALT deduction. You have the same state income taxes, you have the same property taxes, which means you're paying about $291,000 in total state taxes. But you can only deduct $10,000 of that amount, so the remaining $288,000 $180,000 or so is just wasted. That is not a deduction. You just had to pay that to the state, and you don't get any other benefit for it on your federal tax bill, which means your total taxable federal income is almost the same $2 million. It's $1.99 million. That's your federal taxable income because that SALT deduction has been reduced so much. This means that you're paying over $700,000 in federal income taxes now, which means between state and local, you're paying almost $1 million in taxes, or half your income in this case. That's a difference of over $100,000 between the situation where you had the unlimited SALT deduction and one where you had the limited $10,000 SALT deduction. You could see why a rich person would not want to stay in a high tax area nearly as much as before if it meant that they could get a $100,000 or perhaps much more in a pay raise just by not having to pay that amount in taxes. That deduction by itself serves as a huge tax bump for people who were relying heavily on the SALT tax deduction, which I would assume many people in high tax states were in fact doing. So it's no wonder that someone like Sam Greffin would want to move to a place like Vegas that does not have an income tax at the state level, since you're not getting that benefit on the federal side by having to pay the state taxes anymore. As an aside, I think it's a mischaracterization to call the Trump tax plan an overall tax cut and somehow was only helping the wealthy. I think it really was a mixed bag, because you have provisions like this which drastically increase taxes for people in high tax states, but also you had other provisions like an increased standard deduction, which helps a lot of people at the more median to lower income brackets. So in some areas, taxes were cut, and in others, they were definitely bumped, as in this case. But that's beside the point. The point is, you can see why there's such a massive incentive to move away from high tax, typically liberal states right now. You don't have that deduction anymore, and that can add up to a ton of money if you're making a lot of money, as in the case of Sam Greffin and many other celebrities and YouTube stars and people who are making a lot of money. And it doesn't have to be celebrities. It's just people who make a lot of money, probably have a lot of wealth, have a lot of property taxes to pay. They're not going to want to keep doing that if they can't write it off of their federal income tax anymore. I do wonder if this was a cynical undertone or goal of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, maybe a secondary goal to try and punish high tax states by having people living in them no longer get the benefit of a sort of free ride by paying super high state taxes, which would then just be cut off of their federal taxes. If anything, that was kind of a raw deal for the federal government, since they don't get to keep those taxes, but the states did. And as a way to incentivize people to move away from those blue states, maybe that's exactly what Republicans were setting out to do. I don't know. It's kind of a conspiracy theory, but if you look at it on its surface, that does seem to be one thing that they might have been going for. And so far, it seems like that's happening since this bill went into effect just a couple of years later in 2020. We're seeing a lot of rich people move out of these states, not just here on YouTube, but elsewhere. But anyways, I hope this helps you to understand the impact that the SALT deduction change could really have on someone making a lot of money or who has a lot of local taxes to pay. The tax system is nauseatingly complex, and there were a lot of different changes made in this very complex act. And this is a very simple analysis on just one of them. It definitely will not affect every person the same, and some people might be even better off because of the act, despite making a lot of money and having a lot of local taxes to pay. There's so many different loopholes and deductions that people can manipulate to lower their tax bill, and in some cases deductions were increased, and in others they were decreased, like with the SALT tax deduction. However, I do think this is one of the driving forces behind the sort of wealth exodus from high tax states at the moment, since they were always high tax states, at least in recent memory, and it's not as though there was some huge tax hike at the state level, but instead we saw this big deduction go away. However, things like the proposed California wealth tax would only exacerbate this issue. I covered it on this channel before, and you'd have even more rich people with a bigger incentive to leave high tax states. But anyways, that's all I've got for today. If you like this video, please like it since it helps the channel out a lot. If you like this sort of content about investing, personal finance, taxes even, if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel. And again, if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. I put out new videos every single week about those topics, so I wouldn't want you guys to miss out. And check out my book, The One Property Retirement, about a simple strategy for building your retirement nest egg using real estate. It's great for beginners who might be unfamiliar with the actual real estate process and finding and vetting a deal, running the numbers, all that great stuff, to actually getting to the closing table and through the closing process and beyond with maintaining and renting out the property. If you end up reading the book, definitely leave a review on Amazon, since that would help me out a lot. But until next time, take care.